House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we give you thanks for giving us another day. You have promised, O God, that you are with us wherever we are and whatever we are doing, to heal and to help, to give strength and make us whole. On this day, the House and the Senate draw our nation's attention as the process of impeachment moves forward. Bless all members of Congress with wisdom. Give them the courage to honor the Constitution as they have promised to do, so that all Americans can proudly observe their government in action. Opinion and feelings will be on edge. May all members be filled by your Holy Spirit and engage each other with goodwill and respect. May all that is done this day and in the days to come be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House her approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved.
Madam Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, I demand a vote on the Speaker's approval of the journal.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The journal stands approved. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present, and I make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from California, Mr. Liu.
Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, today on Martin Luther King's birthday, I rise to recognize a Buffalo, New York resident born the same year as Dr. King, who continues to serve as a local church, community, and business leader, my good friend Clifford Bell. Brother Bell, as he is known in Western New York for the love he brings to all those around him, has served as a senior business advisor to Buffalo State's Small Business Development Center. He was a colleague of mine on the Buffalo City Council, and he has led the Martin Luther King Jr. celebration in Buffalo for 3 decades. As a council member, Brother Bell is known for the line, "For whom the bells toll, this bell tolls for you," a quote that historically references the interconnectedness of humanity and his commitment to service. Dr. Martin Luther King, in his "Where Do We Go From Here" address, said, "Hate is too great a burden to bear. I have decided to love." Brother Bell has lived a life of love representing the best of our community and our country. We as a nation can learn from his example. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
Madam Speaker, I move unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Congratulations to General John W. J. Raymond, who was sworn in as the first Chief of Space Operations for the newly established U.S. Space Force yesterday. As a senior member of the House Armed Services Committee, I am grateful to President Donald Trump for General Raymond's confirmation and for being able to attend the National Defense Authorization Act signing, which officially established the U.S. Space Force. General Raymond is a Clemson University alumnus and has over 30 years of military experience. This establishment is absolutely critical to our national security, he said during his remarks after being sworn in. I am grateful that the U.S. Space Force is in strong, capable hands. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we will never forget September 11th, defeating terrorists overseas in the global war on terrorism with the courageous leadership of President Donald Trump.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas rise?
To address the House, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to take a moment to honor an outstanding organization, Alpha Kappa Alpha. This is their Founders Day, 112 years old. Isn't it interesting that young women who were in the shadow of the Emancipation Proclamation, the shadow of slavery, in the midst of Jim Crowism, and on the precipice of World War I, organized at Howard University to be able to give African American women a place for leadership, civic-mindedness. And as we are on the precipice of a great historic moment dealing with protecting the Constitution here in the United States Congress and the United States Senate, I'm glad to honor these women that included Ethel Hedgeman, Margaret Flagg Holmes, Marjorie Hill, Lily Burke, Beulah Elizabeth Burke, Anna Easter Brown, and many other young women who decided to take a stand for what is right in this nation and the opportunities of diversity and leadership. Congratulations to our national president, Dr. Glover, and congratulations to all of our Alpha Kappa Alpha members throughout the United States of America. Happy Founders Day 112. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama rise?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. After a long, embarrassing month, the House will finally transmit the articles of impeachment against President Trump to the United States Senate. Yet I understand Speaker Pelosi and her managers will continue to push for witnesses in the Senate trial because, in their words, they want the facts. That claim is nonsense. House Democrats blocked the testimony of the whistleblower, DNC staffer Alexandra Chalupa, Nellie Orr with Fusion GPS, and of course, the two gentlemen pictured to my left, Devin Archer and Hunter Biden. In reality, Democrats' entire case depended upon hiding the facts. As more facts emerged last year, their case collapsed. Public support for impeachment fell as the weakness of their case was exposed. I remind my friends in the majority, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I predict House Democrats will not fare as well blocking these witnesses in the United States Senate, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yesterday, the House released additional documents and new text messages from Lev Parnas. He is an associate of Donald Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. He's also been indicted. And these documents and text messages show a chilling picture of surveillance, both physical and electronic, of the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. This is all the more reason why we need to have a full and fair trial in the United States Senate. The House today is going to transmit the articles of impeachment to the Senate. Donald Trump was impeached for abusing his power, for soliciting interference in our elections from a foreign government. He will be branded for the rest of his life. It is permanent. It will not go away. And now we need the Senate to act and have a fair trial. And that means witnesses and documents. If they do not do that, it will be the equivalent of a cover-up. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize an outstanding member of my staff who is moving on to a career in the defense sector, Danielle Hauser. Danielle graduated from UF in 2015 with a degree in International and Global Studies and then moved to D.C. to begin her career on Capitol Hill. In January of 17, she helped open our office as my executive assistant, later moving into a legislative role and becoming my legislative aide for military and defense affairs. After Hurricane Michael devastated the Panhandle, DJ played a key role in ensuring Tyndall Air Force Base and all of our bases had the resources they needed for recovery. DJ is a force of nature. She's ambitious, disciplined, hardworking, and cheerful, a joy to be with. She's been an integral part of my office since its inception, and we will miss her greatly. Madam Speaker, please join me in recognizing Danielle Hauser for all that she has done for North Florida and our nation, and wish her luck in her future endeavors. I yield back.
what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my right.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This weekend, I will join hundreds of activists and supporters for the Women's March in Seneca Falls, New York, home of the historic 1848 Women's Rights Convention that sparked the suffrage movement. We will celebrate the incredible strides we have made in the fight for women's rights and the many strong, courageous women who have shattered glass ceilings to achieve progress. The year 2020 marks the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, guaranteeing and protecting women's constitutional right to vote. Now more than ever, as we face new barriers threatening to roll back the rights of women, we must take up the mantle of Susan B. Anthony and the suffragists who came before us to continue to fight for full equality that all women deserve. Together, we will keep persisting. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Richard N. Riley on a well-deserved retirement after many years of service to the United States of America. Rich has been a United States Department Pearson Fellow in my Washington, D.C. office over this past year and has provided invaluable guidance and assistance to both my staff and my constituents. A native of Minnesota, Rich began his service to our nation as an Army infantryman, and then he continued on later with a 20-year career as a naval officer. Following his time in the military, Rich joined the State Department of Foreign Service officer, advocating for America's interests abroad. On behalf of the 4th District of Florida and a grateful nation, I offer my heartfelt thanks to Rich for his many contributions to our country and wish him a relaxing and fulfilling retirement, enjoyed with his wife Susan, his children, and their new granddaughter Peyton. Congratulations, Rich.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I speak today for Raif Badawi, a Saudi Arabian human rights blogger unjustly imprisoned since 2012 for exercising his right to freedom of expression. His supposed crime, criticizing Islam and the religious police. His sentence, 10 years in prison, 1,000 lashes, and a huge fine. Monday, January 13th, was Raif's 36th birthday, the 8th he has spent in prison, away from his wife and away from his 3 children. January 9th was the 5th anniversary of the day that Raif endured the first 50 of those 1,000 lashes. That the flogging has not continued is a small mercy, but the prolonged imprisonment in harsh conditions is taking a terrible physical and mental toll. The Saudi authorities must end this egregious injustice. Madam Speaker, I again demand the immediate and unconditional release of prisoner of conscience Raif Badawi. I renew my call for a halt to all weapons sales and military aid until the Saudi regime cleans up its human rights record, which is appalling. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from North Carolina rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, Madam Speaker.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Life is the most precious gift from God, from conception until natural death, and every moment in between. We must recognize, celebrate, and bear witness to the sanctity of life. Next Friday, tens of thousands of people from across the country will come to Washington and participate in the March for Life. This event serves as a clear reminder that preserving and protecting the lives of the most vulnerable is not simply an option, it's a mandate that we all must uphold. Madam Speaker, I refuse to stand idly by as the unborn are brazenly targeted. Amidst the shroud of rancor and divisiveness that hangs over this House at present, I will continue to fight for their right to life. They deserve nothing less than unwavering advocates. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Pennsylvania rise?
Madam Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my...
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today to honor my constituent and friend, June Parkinson. June passed away on January 4th at the age of 64. June was a loving wife, a mother, a grandmother, a gifted artist, and a special education teacher. and a true community leader. She devoted her life in service of others, sharing her talents for the betterment of us all. June was a longtime committee person, member of the Greater Glenside Patriotic Association, and chairperson of the Glenside 4th of July Parade. The annual parade is the longest continuing Independence Parade in America and the pride of our hometown of Glenside. June made it her mission each year to ensure this treasured tradition continued. She was an extraordinary activist, environmental activist, best remembered for spearheading the yearly Earth Day cleanup of Keswick Avenue. And even though June was born in Boston and was a Red Sox fan, all of us Philly fans of Glenside embraced and thanked her for her kind heart, her giving spirit, and her dedication to community. I join June's friends and family and the wider Glenside community in mourning her loss. I am thankful for June's example of quiet acts of service. I am better for having known June. Thank you. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Madam Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize January as National Mentoring Month, when we volunteer our time to provide support and guidance for our nation's young people. They're better equipped to tackle personal and professional challenges. A good mentor could be a friend, a family member, a boss, or a school counselor. Effective counseling prior to graduation can assist students in making better informed decisions about their education options and career prospects. That is why Congressman Jim Langevin and I introduced the Counseling for Career Choice Act. Despite a great deal of money being invested to improve education, very little has been spent to address career development specifically. This bill authorizes a grant program to give states and local education agencies access to current counseling programs or the means to implement new counseling frameworks. Additionally, the bill provides resources to ensure counselors can support their students to the best of their abilities. When we equip students with the tools that they need to succeed, they embark on educational journeys that lead to rewarding careers. I'd like to encourage my colleagues to join Congressman Langevin and I in support of H.R. 5092, the Counseling for Career Choice Act. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise? Objection. Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today for our nation's communities saddled with stranded nuclear waste stockpiles because the federal government has failed to meet its obligation to find a permanent repository. My constituents in Zion understand this all too well. After its nuclear plant closed in 1998, 2 million pounds of spent nuclear fuel remained. Literally sitting on the shores of Lake Michigan, more than 50 casts severely affect the quality of life of the residents of Zion. It deters economic investment, depresses home values, drives up property taxes, and stretches the city's already thin budget. So today, I am proud to reintroduce the Stranded Act to at last provide some compensation for these affected communities. Zion is not alone. Across the country, there are more than a dozen communities with nuclear plants at various stages of decommissioning, with more to come. I am grateful for the support and leadership of Appropriations Chairwoman Nita Lowey and Appropriations Subcommittee on Energy and Water Development Chairwoman Marcy Kaptur in reintroducing this bill. Together, we are fighting to make the federal government do right for communities like Zion. I urge my colleagues to join us, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana rise? Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, the people of Louisiana recently lost a respected political leader, a businessman, a war veteran, and a civil rights leader, Mr. Willie Belton. Mr. Belton had a life of service to others. He was awarded the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart under fire heroically during the Korean War. He marched with Dr. Martin Luther King in Washington, Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, and like Dr. King, Mr. Belton always advocated Christian values and nonviolent protest. He also led his local NAACP chapter in Louisiana, and in February 2019 was awarded the Louisiana Medal of Honor. Please join me in honoring his lifetime of service to Louisiana and a Louisiana treasure, Mr. Willie Belton, whose memory will fortunately live with us forever. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
I ask consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to congratulate Julie Bornstein on her retirement from the Coachella Valley Housing Coalition. For more than 30 years, Julie has worked tirelessly as an advocate for affordable housing throughout the Coachella Valley. She has dedicated her career to making a difference in the lives of thousands of individuals in Riverside and Imperial counties. Her leadership has been instrumental in raising awareness about the homelessness issue so many members of our communities face, and through her efforts we have seen an increase in the availability of affordable housing throughout the Inland Empire. Apart from her work in the Coachella Valley Housing Coalition, Julie served in the California State Assembly and was chosen to serve as chair of the Democratic Caucus. She then went on to serve as director of the California Department of Housing and Community Development. Later, Julie was appointed CEO and president of the Campaign for Affordable Housing. Julie's work has not gone unnoticed, and the Coachella Valley is a better place because of her. We wish you a happy retirement, Julie. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. I rise today to honor the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, today being his actual birthday, 1929, 91 years ago. Dr. King has become synonymous with the civil rights movement and the right to ensure each and every one of us are treated equally, regardless of our background and upbringing. His strong Christian beliefs helped him inspire positive social change through peaceful protests and demonstrations. In a nation plagued by identity politics, his pursuit of liberties is relevant now as it was during the 1960s. Dr. King demonstrated to a world that is not the color of a person's skin that mattered, rather the nature of their character. Indeed, one of my favorite quotes and one to live by. The work of Dr. King is not yet done. He remains a shining example of the right way to lead, the right way to peacefully protest, and the right way to inspire. I look forward to joining with the celebration at the Southside Community Center in Oroville, California, this coming Monday, where his legacy is celebrated and even brought forward by scholarships for the young people that will be there. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise today to honor one of my heroes, Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who was born on this day 91 years ago. Next Monday, the nation will pay tribute to this incredible man and his life, and as well as his enduring legacy, a legacy rooted in unconditional love. In these difficult and divided times, plagued by the rise of hate, I can't think of a better legacy to reflect upon as we embark upon this year. The road ahead will be difficult for our nation, but I'm encouraged by and find great hope in the following words once spoke by Dr. King. Quote, "We can no longer afford to worship the God of hate or bow before the altar of retaliation. The oceans of history are made turbulent by the ever-rising tides of hate. History is cluttered with the wreckage of nations and individuals that pursued this self-defeating path of hate. Love is the ultimate force that makes for the saving choice of life and good against the damning choice of death and evil. Therefore, the first hope in our inventory must be the hope that love is going to have the last word." I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. During the President's upcoming State of the Union address, he has the opportunity to deliver a strong message of unity, peace, and hope to all of those who tune in, both Americans and all who are watching abroad. Just in the last few months, we've seen that America is the beacon of hope for the people of Hong Kong and Taipei who are suffering under pressure from Beijing. We've seen that America is the lifeline for people in Beirut and Tehran who find themselves under the thumb of the Iranian regime. This is a critical moment in world history. People are looking to the United States and our president for leadership more than ever. And so I urge my colleagues in the majority party to refrain from the impeachment antics and charades. Don't be petty. Rise above your worst impulses and support our president. The world is watching. Thank you. I yield back.
Members are reminded to address their remarks to the chair. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Connecticut rise?
Madam Speaker, I rise to address the House and ask to provide my remarks.
Without objection, gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of H.J. Res. 76, a resolution of the disapproval of Secretary of Education's new borrower defense rule. This rule guts consumer protections for students and taxpayers and makes it more difficult for students to access relief for loans obtained for degrees that have no value. Over 1,200 students in Connecticut have been defrauded by predatory, for-profit colleges like Corinthian and ITT Tech and still await relief. The department has made the approval process more difficult, leaving hundreds of thousands of students desperately waiting for answers. Too many first-generation low-income students, student veterans, and students of color are lured into these fraudulent schools that prioritize profits over helping students advance their education. The DeVos rule eliminates automatic school closing discharges and weakens the early warning system that forces institutions to invest in the potential debt relief. And it puts a greater burden of proof on students, barring them from relief if they cannot file their claims fast enough. As a career educator who truly understands the equalizing power of education, I say it is unconscionable that Department of Education and the Secretary do not feel a moral imperative to protect students. I urge my colleagues to reject this resolution.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise? Without objection, gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in remembrance of the precious lives of Preston Cope and Bailey Holt, two victims of a tragic school shooting at Marshall County High School in Benton, Kentucky, 2 years ago. This tragic event devastated the Benton community and took 2 lives away from us far too soon. Preston and Bailey continue to be dearly missed by their families and the Marshall County community, which has shown incredible resilience in the face of trying circumstances. Preston Cope and Bailey Holt remain in our hearts and minds to this day. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 767, I now send to the desk a resolution anointing and authorizing managers for the impeachment trial of Donald John Trump, President of the United States, and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 798, resolved that Mr. Schiff, Mr. Nadler, Ms. Lofgren, Mr. Jeffries, Mrs. Demings, Mr. Crow, and Ms. Garcia of Texas are appointed managers to conduct the impeachment trial against Donald John Trump, President of the United States, that a message be sent to the Senate to inform the Senate of these appointments, and that the managers so appointed may, in connection with the preparation and the conduct of the trial, exhibit the articles of impeachment to the Senate and take all other actions necessary, which may include the following. 1. Employing legal, clerical, and other necessary assistance and incurring such other expenses as may be necessary to be paid from amounts available to the Committee on the Judiciary under applicable expense resolutions or from the applicable accounts of the House of Representatives. 2. Sending for persons and papers and filing with the Secretary of the Senate on the part of the House of Representatives any pleadings in conjunction with or subsequent to the exhibition of the articles of impeachment that the managers consider necessary.
Pursuant to House Resolution 767, the resolution is debatable for 10 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, and the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield myself 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, the resolution before us today appoints managers to prosecute the Senate impeachment trial of President Trump. This trial is necessary because President Trump gravely abused the power of his office when he strong-armed a foreign government to announce investigations into his domestic political rival. He betrayed our country when he used the powers of his office, including withholding vital U.S. military assistance, to pressure that government to help him win re-election. He invited foreign interference into our elections. Again, he jeopardized our national security. He did all this for his personal political gain. And then he violated the Constitution by stonewalling Congress's efforts to investigate, ordering an absolute blockade of evidence. Despite that, the House was able to uncover powerful evidence that demonstrates beyond doubt the President's betrayal and violations of the Constitution. But we still have not heard the whole truth, because the President has refused to allow a single document to be turned over to the House in response to our impeachment subpoenas. And he has prevented us from hearing key witnesses as well. This is unprecedented. Our Speaker has led our fight for a fair trial in the Senate. Above all, a fair trial must include additional documents and all relevant witnesses. The American people have common sense. They know that any trial that does not allow witnesses is not a trial. It is a cover-up. The Speaker's insistence on this point has gotten results. Just yesterday, we received critical new evidence from the President's former associate, Lev Parnas, that further proves Mr. Trump's scheme to pressure Ukraine to go after his personal political opponents. New witness testimony has become available as well, including John Bolton's announcement that he would honor a Senate subpoena. Under today's resolution, the managers also have broad authority to submit to the Senate any additional evidence the House may acquire on its own, and we will do so. The Senate is on trial. We will see whether they conduct a fair trial and allow the witnesses or conduct a cover-up. Today's resolution is the next step in this serious and solemn constitutional process. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the resolution.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This impeachment process has been flawed from the outset. It resembles not a congressional action, it resembles more a Dr. Seuss book, knowing not which way it goes. On September 24th, the Speaker declared at a press conference the House was conducting an impeachment inquiry. However, to the contrary, to the Speaker's decree that we were all of a sudden in impeachment inquiry, the House did not authorize the impeachment inquiry until October 31st by adopting H.R. 660. It is just said just a moment ago that the Speaker has been leading the fight for a fair trial in the Senate. I wish the Speaker had been leading for a fair hearing in the House instead of trashing our rules. For those 71 out of 78 days from the time it was announced at a press conference to the time we finished, the President was not permitted to participate in these meetings. Think about that, 71 days out of 78 in which we actually did something on impeachment. He was not presented the ability to cross-examine fact witnesses, present counter-arguments, no due process at all in those 71 days. When presented with the opportunity when it came to the Judiciary Committee, instead of the Judiciary Committee stepping up and actually acting like the Judiciary Committee of the Committee of Impeachment, we punted. We had some law professors who already had their basic talking points. He could have cross-examined them. That would have done a lot of good. Then we could have had witnesses of staffers who testified. Again, a lot of good. Where were the fact witnesses? Instead of the rubber stamp that we were warned about 20 years ago by the current chairman, we became the rubber stamp. Democrats repeatedly violated House rules and blatantly abused the rules. They even wrote in H. 660, even to this day, we will pass this out in violation of H. 660. They used inflammatory rhetoric, haunting them because this is what they had to do. One Democrat said, I call for impeachment today because it's one heck of an emergency. Another said, we have a crime in progress. We have an emergency that our national election is going on right now. But my favorite in December, it's a crime spree in progress. Oh, the hyperbole just reeks in this room. When we understand this, if it was such an emergency, if there was in lieu to finding a 911 call, then why did we hold this for almost a month? Well, we've been told that it's to help a Senate fair trial. Be damned, the House inappropriate process we had. But even though the process was bad, I'm going to go back and make sure the facts are, let's make sure the facts are here, because they still haven't changed. A phone call that was put out in a transcript in which no pressure was applied. There was no conditionality on anything given in that call or sense to do that. There was also nothing given by the Ukrainians to actually get this money that was released. By the way, before it was actually statutory deadline of September 31st, they did nothing. They got the money anyway. But the problem is they want the Senate to do their job for them. But that's not how it works. You see, the Speaker, and what I've heard today, even from folks giving 1 minute, Madam Speaker, is that this is all they wanted. It was a political impeachment. They have said he is impeached for life. This shows the true motivation, I believe, of the other side. It is their dislike for this president and the good work he is doing. So, Madam Speaker, before I reserve here for a moment, this has always been a political impeachment. Even today on the floor, the talk of the president being forever impeached and it's always being sustained forgets the Senate trial. I hope this ends, this political impeachment, and this body never sees it again. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York.
I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished chairman of the Intelligence Committee, gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise in strong support of the resolution. The task before us is a grave one, but one demanded by our oath. The impeachment inquiry undertaken by the House of Representatives found that President Donald J. Trump abused his power and sought to cover it up with an unprecedented campaign of obstruction. He withheld hundreds of millions of U.S. dollars in vital military aid to Ukraine, a close ally at war with Russia, and withheld a coveted White House meeting critical to the Ukrainian leader's international legitimacy until Ukraine would commit to help President Trump cheat in the next election. President Trump put his own personal interests above the national interests, above our national security, and if not stopped, he will do it again. For that reason, he was impeached, and for that reason, the House managers will take the case to the Senate and to the American people. Because the appropriate remedy, indeed the only remedy, is the conviction and removal from office of President Donald Trump. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. McCarthy.
The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Back when this national nightmare began, Speaker Pelosi laid bare her intentions and purely partisan agenda. She told her caucus that they needed to strike while the iron is hot. This was always an exercise in raw partisan politics. Contrary to the warnings of our founders, and over the last month, we saw the justification for running the fastest, thinnest, and weakest impeachment in American history crumble. Instead of sending the articles of impeachment to the Senate for trial, Speaker Pelosi held them hostage in a failed play to gain leverage that she did not and would never have. In terms of concessions, she got nothing. No control, no moral victories. In other words, another failed strategy. After a month of counterproductive and harmful delays, I have 3 questions for my friends on the other side of the aisle, the Democrats. What happened to impeachment being urgent? What happened to Congress being on the clock? What happened to saying the House would be derelict in our duty if we did not act immediately? These were all the assertions Democrats made over the past several months. I guess it turns out none of them are true. These delay tactics were self-serving, hypocritical, and discrediting. But they made an important admission. Some might even call it a concession. You proved a very big point. Democrats do not even believe their case was robust enough to win in a trial. Even the Speaker's allies admit the delays undermined their case. Some has gone as far as describing it as a failed strategy. These are those who are closest to her. Senator Feinstein, the senior Democrat from our state of California and the hometown senator of the Speaker, said, "The longer it goes on, the less urgent it becomes." And Chairman Adam Smith, a confidant of the Speaker, said it was time to transmit the articles to the Senate. Before these statements were made last week, before the Senate Speaker relented, they are significant because they were public and they were honest. I'm disappointed these individuals did not have the courage to stand by their initial comments. If impeachment was truly as urgent as Democrats claimed, the majority should not have waited for the Speaker to choose a political, convenient time. Anyone could have recognized this ploy would not work. The House and the Senate are different institutions, and at this point in time, controlled by different parties. As James Madison wrote in the Federalist Papers, the purpose of bicameralism is to guard against the dangers of encroachment and to stop toxic resolutions from taking effect. We saw separation of powers prevail against an abuse of power, just as the Constitution intends. The idea of withholding a sloppy impeachment case to force the Senate to change its rules is constitutionally and politically unheard of. Frankly, it's just ridiculous. In Article 1, Section 5, the Constitution clearly states, each House may determine the roles of its proceedings. It doesn't say the House may determine the roles of proceedings in the Senate. If anything, the Speaker's actions have only further persuaded members of the Senate that the evidence of impeachment was neither thorough nor satisfactory. But you know what? Let's be honest. This was never about persuasion. It was never about the rule of law. It was what Alexander Hamilton warned us, that one party would get control. And just because of the animosity would demean the process of impeachment. And by selecting these particular batch of managers, the Speaker has further proven she's not interested in winning the minds, the hearts, or even following the Constitution. Let's take a look at the first three names Speaker Pelosi announced in her anticipated announcement earlier today. Chairman Schiff, a man who has already taken on the role of judge, jury, and fact witness throughout the entire House impeachment process. Chairman Nadler, someone who campaigned for the chairmanship of the Judiciary Committee that's responsible for impeachment beginning as far back as December 2017, before you were even in the majority, on the notion that he would be the best person to lead the charge on potential impeachment against the president. You see, you get a chairmanship by your conference voting for you. You campaign for it. You put your best ideas out there of why you should be the chairman. In 2017, that was the campaign. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, a member who almost 2 years to this date voted in support of impeachment. You know, that was more than a year before the Ukraine call even took place. Those are just some of the managers. If you think about the members, there's people who were, on the day they were sworn in to this body, told those who supported him the greatest that they were going to impeach him. As I've said in the past, there is an issue with fairness. But instead of looking to the Senate, Speaker Pelosi should be looking within her own caucus. From the beginning, this investigation was marred by selective leaks to the media, a completely predetermined process. Yes, we've been through impeachment before, but it was much different. We believed in the rule of law back then, that we would face our accuser, that you could cross-examine, that the minority could actually ask for witnesses. The day that impeachment was asked to come forward, I sent a letter to the Speaker, laying out 10 items, none that were made up. You know what they were? The fair process we've always used in the past. The answer was no. Because they've been working on this for 2.5 years, they could not let fairness determine the outcome. Any other prosecutor would be disbarred for such blatant bias, especially if that prosecutor was a fact witness in the case. The reason for this impeachment is the same reason it's taken Democrats 30 days to send the articles to the Senate. Just spite. They wanted to stain the president's record without giving him a fair chance to clear his name. Last year, we saw House Democrats invert the burden of proof during their fair investigation. For every American watching, take, for instance, if this was your government, if you switched the burden of proof on you. We have a congressman, Max Rose, characterized it this way, this new freshman of the majority. The president says he's innocent, so all we're saying is prove it. God forbid government accuses you of something as an average American and say you have to prove it. We just switched a fundamental belief as an American. But only in this house do we do that. This guilty and proven innocent mentality was an admission that impeachment was not about upholding justice or protecting the rule of law. Now Democrats have invented an even more destructive standard. You're guilty because they say so. Our founders feared this day. Alexander Hamilton warned us of this day. I had hoped this day would not come. I would hope those who uphold the Constitution would believe in the rule of law instead of the spite of the dislike of an individual. Like the kangaroo courts on college campuses, or an accusation is enough for a conviction. Even as early as just last Sunday in an interview, Speaker Pelosi made that point very clear to all of us. Asked what a Senate acquittal would mean, she said it didn't matter. The president is impeached forever. Is that what this is all about? Just a personality. Just an abuse of power that you have within a house that we all feared this country would never do. You could almost see on the speaker's smile as she spoke about this new standard how incredibly solemn she was. Madam Speaker, when Americans look back on this sad saga, they will see a rigged process that forever damaged the remedy of impeachment. Speaker Pelosi got nothing from the Senate, but the American people got worse than nothing. They got stuck with the bill for a costly, never-ending investigation. The old saying that you get what you pay for does not apply here. Congress wasted time and millions of dollars on partisan impeachment. In return, taxpayers get nothing. Democrats' misaligned priorities have cost the people solutions that could have improved the quality of their life. There's no greater contrast than what we are doing right here today than what is happening at Pennsylvania Avenue. The president sitting down with another country of a leader and signing a trade agreement. Something people said we could never get done. To make this country stronger, to make America the next century ours. But what are we doing here? We are doing what this majority has worked their entire time for. Before they were even sworn in, they campaigned for the position of chairman. For this moment, for this time, for the millions of dollars that are spent, so they could say the president is impeached. That's a lofty history. Those are lofty goals that you now have authored more subpoenas than you created laws. But thank God we got a president in the White House that does not sit back. Yes, he got the United States, Mexico, Canada trade agreement, our top two traders. He's sitting with a trade agreement with China today. But think about how much stronger his hand would have been had that agreement taken place earlier when he got it. No, it was held. Why? Because we were impeaching. That's an amazing agenda, but you promised people you would do it. This is not a moment this body should be proud of. If as Speaker Pelosi likes to say, impeachment is a national civics lesson, let's use this blunder as a teachable moment. I'll make this promise to the American public, because the day will come that the majority will switch. We will uphold the Constitution. We will listen to the words of Alexander Hamilton. And just because somebody else is in an office that we may not like, we will not change the rule of law. We'll not accuse them of breaking it and say they have to prove it. We believe America is more than a country. That America is an idea of the straightness that we, yes, would make students in Iran rise up for the freedom of what they know America to be. That the rule of law was so powerful. This is a moment in a civic lesson that we should learn. This is a moment that will teach our grandchildren that, yes, more than 200 years ago, the founders crafted an amazing country, but they warned us what abuse of power would look like. The sad part is we're witnessing it. What a contrast in a day and time. Moving forward, we must not redo these same mistakes in Congress. And my promise to you, if power was to change, the rule of law would come back. We'd have an agenda focused on people, not on politics. We'd have a voice that you're innocent until proven guilty. We would not abuse our power just for the sheer shake of politics to say you're impeached forever because I dislike you. We are better than this. It's a sad day. But the great thing about America, it will all change because the people have the voice. I yield back.
Members are once again reminded to address their remarks to the chair. Gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, 2 points. First, my colleagues in the minority would rather talk about anything than try to defend what President Trump actually did, because they can't. There is overwhelming evidence that the President pressured the Ukrainian government to interfere in our election on his behalf. Then he covered it up. These are high crimes and misdemeanors, and we will prove that in the Senate. Second, our minority colleagues don't like our ongoing fight for a fair trial because it got results. New documents and additional witnesses have emerged that unmistakably point to the President's guilt, and we have exposed the efforts of some in the Senate majority to put on a sham trial. The American people understand that a trial without evidence, without witnesses, is no trial at all, but a cover-up, and that will not stand. We must protect the Constitution and the integrity of our elections. That is what this is about. We must remove this president to protect our country. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia has 30 seconds remaining. Gentleman from New York has 1 minute remaining, and the gentleman from New York has the right to close. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
And I appreciate that, Madam Speaker. Is the gentleman from New York ready to close?
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
There's no other speakers. Our closing is no other speakers.
I have one more speaker.
And you're not ready to close. I reserve.
No.
No, the gentleman's incorrect. The gentleman from New York has one remaining speaker who will close. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 30 seconds.
I will take it back. Give me the time one more time, Madam Speaker.
The gentleman from Georgia has 30 seconds remaining. The gentleman from New York has 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for your
You're welcome.
Work. Look, the 2 facts that just came out right here, and again, we're going to hear in just a moment, that there are facts. Undoubtedly, the mics are not working on the other side, majority side. We've talked about the facts. There is not overwhelming evidence. We've discussed this over and over and over till we're blue in the face, but it doesn't matter because this is a political impeachment. This has nothing to do with the facts. We've shown that there was nothing done wrong, but that does not matter. When the train is on the tracks, the whistle is blowing, impeachment matters, and the only thing that matters on a timeline, the only real emergency here is that there's a 2020 election in which the Democrats can't stand to see the fact this president is going to win again. They can't stand the fact of who they've got running, so what do? We impeach him, as they said, for life. That's wrong.
Gentleman's
Vote no.
time's expired.
I yield back.
Gentleman from New York.
Again, no defense. I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished Speaker of the House, the gentlelady from California, Ms.
Gentlelady is
Pelosi.
recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding and for his exceptional custodianship of the Constitution of the United States. For 13 years, the top Democrat on the Constitution and Civil Liberties Subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee. And thank you for your leadership in protecting and defending the Constitution, the oath that we take as members of Congress. As I enter into the conversation, I do want to thank the distinguished gentleman from Georgia for his apology for his ridiculous remarks about me and House Democrats. Thank you. We accept your apology, Mr. Collins. Now I want to go to the purpose of why we're on the floor today. My colleagues on both sides of the aisle We are here today to cross a very important threshold in American history. On December 18th, the House of Representatives passed articles of impeachment of Donald Trump, articles of impeachment for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. By his own admission, the president stated that, yes, he had had that conversation with the president of Ukraine, but he didn't see anything wrong with it. Well, we don't agree with that assessment. And yes, it is a fact. When someone is impeached, they are always impeached. It cannot be erased. So I stand by that comment, although I know you don't like hearing it. I stand by this American flag, picture of the American flag, as I did the day that we introduced the articles of impeachment onto the floor. Because every day, all over America, in classrooms as well as courtrooms, and in this Congress of the United States when we meet, we pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. And to the republic for which it stands. That is what our nation is. That is the genius, the beautiful, exquisite genius of the Constitution, of that we are a republic. That was the decision of our founders, their vision. They didn't want a monarchy. They wanted a republic. And when Benjamin Franklin came out of Independence Hall and was asked, what do we have, Mr. Franklin, a monarchy or a republic? He said, a republic, if we can keep it. I often wondered why he said that, why that would be in doubt. But we see why it is in doubt right now, when the President of the United States has said, Article 2 says, I can do whatever I want. That's a monarchy. That is not a republic that we pledge our allegiance to every single day. And so here we are today with the articles of impeachment about to be transmitted to the United States Senate. I was thinking this morning and mentioned in a previous public event the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. Listen, my children, and you will hear the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. Well, listen, my children, you will hear about an assault on the Constitution of the United States, undermining the republic for which our flag stands, by the President of the United States. The President of the United States, in using appropriated funds enacted in a bipartisan way by this Congress, funds that were meant to help the Ukraine fight the Russians. The President considered that his private ATM machine, I guess, and said he could say to the President, he could make, do me a favor. Do me a favor. Do you paint houses too? What is this? Do me a favor. So we have a situation that is very sad. Don't talk to me about my timing. For a long time, I resisted the calls from across the country for impeachment of the president for obvious violations of the Constitution that he had committed. But recognizing the divisiveness of impeachment, I held back. Frankly, I said, this president isn't worth it. But when he acted the way he did in relationship to withholding funds from Ukraine in return for a benefit to him that was personal and political, he crossed a threshold. He gave us no choice. He gave us no choice. So, children, our Constitution is the vision of our founders. They were so brave. They declared independence. They did in a time frame when in the course of human events it becomes necessary. They declared independence. They fought a war of independence and bravely succeeded. They wrote documents, our founding documents, the Constitution. Thank God they made it amendable so that we could ever be expanding freedom in our country. And that, my children, is what you pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic contained in that Constitution of the United States. So we take that oath. And when we become members of Congress or other public office, we take an oath to protect and defend that Constitution of the United States. And the President of the United States takes an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, an oath that he has blatantly violated. And for this reason, he was impeached by the House of Representatives. And for this reason, we thought it would be helpful to have not only the strong case for impeachment and removal that was put forth in this House, but to know that more was to come. And we didn't make it come because we said we're going to wait until after Christmas to send this over. They would like to have had us sent it over on Christmas Eve so they could dismiss it. Perhaps they don't realize that dismissal is cover-up, but that has been one of their trains of thought. Dismissal is cover-up. I was so disappointed the other day, last Friday, I guess Thursday, when the leader of the United States Senate, rather than strengthening the institution in which he serves, became subservient and said and signed on to a resolution that would dismiss charges. Dismiss. Dismissal is cover-up. And so in the course of the time since we passed the resolution, and not because of the time, we passed it on December 18th. On December 20th, new emails show that 91 minutes after Trump's phone call with the Ukrainian president, a top Office of Management Budget Aid asked the Department of Defense to hold off on sending military aid to Ukraine. On December 29th, revelations emerged of the OMB director and acting chief of staff Mulvaney's role in the delay of aid, the effort by lawyers in the administration to justify the delay, and the alarm, most importantly, the alarm that in the administration that delay caused within the administration. On January 2nd, newly unredacted Pentagon emails, which the House subpoenaed and the president blocked, raised serious concerns by the Trump administration officials about the legality of the president's hold on the aid to Ukraine. On January 6th, former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton said he would comply with the subpoena compelling his testimony. His lawyer stated he had new relevant information. On January 13th, reports emerged that the Russian government hacked the Ukrainian gas company Burisma as part of their ongoing effort to influence the U.S. election in support of Trump. On yesterday, House committees, Mr. Nadler, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Engel, and Congresswoman Maloney, Madam Chair Maloney, released new evidence pursuant to a House subpoena from Lev Parnas, recently photographed with the Republican leader, an associate of Rudy Giuliani, that further proves that the president was the central player in the scheme to pressure Ukraine for his own benefit in the 2020 election. The Senate leader and the president are afraid of more facts coming to light. That is why the leader signed onto that dismissal resolution. A dismissal, again, is a cover-up. The American people will fully understand the Senate's move to begin the trial without witnesses and documents as a pure political cover-up. Whatever the outcome, the American people want a fair trial, fair to the president, fair to the American people. The American people deserve the truth. The Constitution requires a trial, a fair trial. The GOP Senate behaved. The American people. Okay, let me just make this briefer. The House is now moving forward with a vote to transmit the articles and appoint managers. As Speaker, I am proud to appoint outstanding American patriots to serve on the impeachment panel. Chairman Schiff, Chairman Nadler, Chairwoman Zoe Lofgren. This is her third impeachment as a staffer to a House Judiciary Committee member in the Nixon impeachment, as a member of the Judiciary Committee on the Clinton, and now as a House manager, Madam Chair. Madam Chair of our caucus, Hakeem Jeffries, a serious, respected litigator. Val Demings, a member of the police force of Orlando, and for 27 years, and for part of that time, the first woman and African-American police chief of Orlando. She knows her way around the courtroom. Jason Crow from Colorado, an Army Ranger, served our country in the military in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now in the Congress of the United States, and he too, a respected litigator. And Sylvia Garcia of Texas, a judge in a number of capacities in Texas and a member of the Judiciary Committee. We're very honored that you have taken the responsibility, all of you, to bring the articles of impeachment over to the United States Senate with a case for the Constitution, a case for the Constitution. So back to the children, back to the children. We don't want this president or any president to ever violate the Constitution. It is very, very important that we see that that Constitution is central to who we are as a country, our system of government, our Constitution, so valued, so respected, hopefully so honored by everyone who takes an oath of office to support and defend it. I mean, you see the Russians now hacking in Ukraine. It just came out yesterday or the day before. It just reminds me that I think most Americans would think that voters in America should decide who our president is, not Vladimir Putin in Russia deciding who our president is. I'm very concerned that in all of this, whether it's withholding funds for the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian government to fight the Russians, whether it's undermining our commitment to NATO, whether it's, again, making decisions of what happens in Syria vis-a-vis Turkey, favoring the Russians, that all roads lead to Russia. All roads lead to Putin. Well, some in the administration may think that's okay. I don't. But we do insist and wonder why this president and some in this Congress will not come to the defense of our electoral system by allowing that to happen, denying that it's happening, placing the blame elsewhere. This is as serious as it gets for any of us. Only the vote to declare war would be something more serious than this. We take it very seriously. It's not personal, it's not political, it's not partisan, it's patriotic. So again, I thank our distinguished managers for their courage, their dedication, for being willing to spend the time to do the job, to honor the oath that we take and honor the pledge that our children take, allegiance to the flag and to the republic for which it stands. With that, I urge a yes vote and yield back the balance of my time.
All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 767, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the adoption of the resolution. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The resolution is adopted. Gentleman from Georgia.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Does the gentleman ask for the yeas and nays?
Yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device, and pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on adoption of the resolution will be followed by a 5-minute vote on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal, if ordered. This will be a 15-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 228, the nays are 193. The resolution is adopted, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the question on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal, which the Chair will put de novo. The question is on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The journal stands approved. For what purpose is the gentleman from New York
I
rise?
ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection, so ordered. The Chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives, Madam, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on January 15, 2020 at 11:18 a.m. that the Senate passed Senate 2547. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Cheryl L. Johnson.
Chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives, Madam, I write to respectfully tender my resignation as a member of the Committee on Financial Services. It has been an honor to serve in this capacity. Signed sincerely, Representative Peter T. King, Member of Congress.
Objection, the resignation is accepted. Chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives, Madam, I write to respectfully tender my resignation as a member of the House Committee on Homeland Security. It has been an honor to serve in this capacity. Signed, Van Taylor, Member of Congress.
Without objection, the resignation is accepted. The House Chair will lay before the House a communication.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives, Madam, I write to respectfully tender my resignation as a member of the House Committee on Education and Labor. It has been an honor to serve in this capacity. Signed, Van Taylor, Member of Congress.
Without objection, the resignation is accepted. The House will come to order. What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material on H.R. 1230, the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act.
Without objection, so ordered. To House Resolution 790 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of H.R. 1230. The Chair appoints the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
Read both pages? All the way down? The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for their consideration of H.R. 1230, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to amend the Age Discrimination and Employment Act of 1967 and other laws to clarify appropriate standards for federal employment discrimination and retaliation claims and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read for the first time. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking member. minority member of the Committee on Education and Labor. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Scott, and the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Fox, each will control 30 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I rise today in support of H.R. 1230, the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act, or PWADA. I want to thank my colleagues, particularly the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner, for working to pass this bipartisan proposal to restore workplace protections for older workers. In 1967, Congress passed the Age Discrimination and Employment Act, or ADEA, which recognizes the federal government's role in preventing older workers from being forced out of jobs or denied work opportunities because of their age. Importantly, the ADEA was enforced using an evidentiary standard that gave older workers a fair shot at holding employers accountable for age discrimination. Under this standard, workers seeking to challenge age discrimination in employment only had to prove that age was a motivating factor or one of many motivating factors behind an employer's discriminatory action. For decades, this mixed motive standard was consistent with the evidentiary standard in Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which covers claims of unlawful discrimination on the basis of race, sex, national origin, or religion. Unfortunately, in 2009, in Gross v. FBL Financial Services, the Supreme Court upended decades of precedent, significantly raising the burden of proof for older workers. In its 5-4 decision, the court held that plaintiffs must prove that age was the decisive and
Gentleman is correct. The committee will be in order. Committee will be in order.
Thank you.
Members, if you can't having a conversation, please carry it off the floor. The member can proceed. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In its 5-4 decision, the court held that plaintiffs must prove that age was the decisive and determinative motivating factor for the employer's conduct. Under this altered framework, older workers cannot prevail unless they can show that the adverse action would not have occurred but for the employer's age. This higher threshold not only makes it harder for workers who have suffered this higher standard not only makes it harder for workers who have suffered discrimination to achieve redress, it also sends a message to employers that they need not treat age discrimination as seriously as other forms of discrimination. By amending the ADEA to clarify that the mixed motive standard is the evidence standard for evaluating claims, the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act would restore workers' protections and reestablish a consistent burden of proof for claims alleging discrimination on the basis of age. The 2009 Gross decision also opened the door for the courts to apply the but-for standard to other civil rights laws, including Americans with Disabilities Act, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and the anti-retaliation provisions of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The bill before us clarifies that the mixed motive standard also applies to those 3 civil rights acts as well. Despite the bipartisan support in both chambers for this bill, I'm disappointed that the White House has already threatened a veto of this legislation. In reality, the administration has a troubling pattern of blocking legislation to help the very forgotten workers it promised to support. In addition to this legislation, the administration has placed veto threats on the Raise the Wage Act, which would gradually increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2025, the Workplace Violence Protection, the Workplace Violence Prevention for Healthcare and Social Service Workers Act, which would support the safety of healthcare and social service workers. Today, the House has a chance to be on record and stand up for the average American worker, and I urge a yes vote on the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman from Virginia for yielding. I yield myself such time as I may consume. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in opposition to H.R. 1230, the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act. Let me be clear. Every worker, including older workers, should be protected from workplace discrimination at his or her job. This is why Congress has passed a number of laws to protect Americans of all ages against discrimination in the workplace. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, CRA, the Age Discrimination and Employment Act of 1967, ADEA, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Rehab Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, ADA, makes employment discrimination because of an individual's race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, or disability unlawful. Although I appreciate the stated purpose behind H.R. 1230, the rushed approach taken by committee Democrats and the lack of evidence and data to prove that this legislation is needed has led to a seriously flawed bill. Careful examination and scrutiny of any legislative proposal is necessary to determine whether it is needed and whether it appropriately and effectively addresses the relevant issues. Unfortunately, in developing H.R. 1230, the committee majority failed miserably in this regard. Committee Democrats chose not to hold a single hearing solely dedicated to examining either age discrimination or H.R. 1230. Rather, they examined this bill during a hearing that covered multiple topics and several other pieces of legislation completely unrelated to the bill.
Committee will be in order. Members, please carry your conversations off the floor. Gentlewoman from North Carolina will proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we've seen many times during the 116th Congress with other legislation, H.R. 1230 was rushed through the Education and Labor Committee without necessary examination, discussion, or consideration. As a result, we're here debating yet another one-size-fits-all, quote, government knows best, end quote, mandate that rewards special interests and disregards real-world workplace experience and decades of Supreme Court precedent. However, the flawed process is far from the only issue with this legislation. The committee also has no evidence or data indicating this bill is necessary. In fact, the lone Democrat invited witness who testified on H.R. 1230 at a committee hearing covering many bills and topics admitted the impact of the Supreme Court's 2009 decision in Gross versus FBL Financial Services, Inc. is unknown, and she also admitted there's no data indicating workers have been discouraged from filing age discrimination charges with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, or bringing cases. The data simply does not indicate workers have been discouraged from filing discrimination or retaliation charges with the EEOC. Additionally, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, employment numbers for older workers have trended upwards in recent decades. In 2018, older workers earned 7% more than the median for all workers, a large increase from 20 years ago. For workers aged 65 and older, employment tripled from 1988 to 2018, while employment among younger workers grew by about a third. Likewise, over the past 20 years, the number of older workers on full-time work schedules grew 2.5 times faster than the number working part-time. Rather than considering misguided proposals such as H.R. 1230, which furthers government intervention, we ought to be empowering all workers, including older workers, to continue participating and thriving in America's workforce, to build upon, not stifle these impressive trends. Unfortunately, H.R. 1230 does the opposite. This legislation will actually harm older workers while simultaneously enriching trial lawyers. H.R. 1230 overturns Supreme Court precedent by allowing a plaintiff to argue that age was only a motivating, not decisive factor that led to an employer's unfavorable employment action, and it allows these kinds of mixed motive claims across 4 completely different non-discrimination laws. Moreover, allowing mixed motive claims in cases alleging retaliation puts employers in an untenable position of trying to prove that a legitimate employment decision was not in response to a prior complaint. The only party who will be paid in nearly all mixed motive cases is the plaintiff's attorney, because most employers will be able to demonstrate that they would have taken the same action in the absence of the impermissible motivating factor. So the very people this legislation is intended to help will not receive any monetary damages under H.R. 1230. H.R. 1230 will also increase frivolous legal claims against business owners. Such undeserving claims will take valuable resources away from efforts to prevent workplace harassment and discrimination. Finally, committee Republicans offered amendments to advance important priorities and practical solutions for older workers and highlight fundamental flaws in H.R. 1230. Unfortunately, our common sense amendments were defeated on a party line vote in committee. Mr. Chairman, all workers should be protected from workplace discrimination. But by rushing today's legislation to the House floor in an attempt to make up for an abysmal first year in the majority, Democrats have failed older workers. I encourage my colleagues to vote no on H.R. 1230, and with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman from North Carolina reserves. Gentleman, Mr. Scott from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself such time as I may consume just to respond to the idea that this has been rushed. There have been several committee hearings over the last 10 years in both the House and one in the Senate, and that information is recorded in the committee report. I'd also like to point out that the burden of but-for that the gross decision has saddled older workers with now requires them to show not only that they've been discriminated against, but also that they would have gotten the job or wouldn't have been fired but for the fact that they're old. The older person all they know is when they applied for the job, they were told, we don't hire old people. Well, that's not enough, because now you also have to show that you would have gotten the job anyway. You don't know who got hired. You don't know what their qualifications were. And it's an almost impossible burden to prove that not only were you discriminated against, but you know the action would not have been taken but for that action. I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici, the chair of the subcommittee on Civil Rights and Human Services of the Ed and Labor Committee.
Gentlewoman from Oregon is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chairman Scott, for yielding. Today, by supporting the bipartisan Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act, we can protect the civil rights of older workers who are striving to provide for themselves and their families. According to recent data from the Census Bureau and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the percentage of retirement-age Americans in the labor force has doubled since 1985. Unfortunately, age discrimination in the workplace remains disturbingly pervasive. According to the AARP, 3 in 5 workers over the age of 45 reported seeing or experiencing age discrimination on the job. Americans are living and working longer, and we must do all we can to protect them from discrimination. My home state of Oregon has one of the most rapidly aging populations in the country. And I've heard from workers, many in the technology industry, who believe they have been dismissed or denied employment because of their age. My office has helped older workers who have filed age discrimination complaints at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, but the burden and the outcomes are very uncertain. In 1967, Congress passed the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, or ADEA, to prohibit age discrimination in the workplace and to promote the employment of older workers. Then, in 2009, the Supreme Court in the Gross case changed the burden of proof for workers and made it much harder for workers to prove age discrimination. This bipartisan bill simply returns the burden of proof to what it was for decades before the Gross case. I joined Chairman Scott and Congressman Sensenbrenner in reintroducing the bipartisan Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act to amend the ADEA and our other core civil rights laws, the anti-retaliation provision of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. We need to make our laws clear. Unlawful discrimination in the workplace is unacceptable. I thank Chairman Scott and Congressman Sensenbrenner for their work on this important issue. I urge all of my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman from Oregon yields back. Gentleman from Virginia reserves. Gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Walberg.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the ranking member. I rise today in opposition to H.R. 1230. Let's be clear. All of us are against workplace discrimination of any kind. And, Mr. Speaker, at my age, I'm certainly against age discrimination. All of us want to protect all American workers from discrimination. But contrary to the bill's title, this legislation will end up harming workers. It's a payout to trial lawyers by muddying legal standards under the guise of a nice-sounding bill. Any plaintiff who files a discrimination lawsuit under this bill is extremely unlikely to receive any monetary awards, but the trial lawyers will still get paid for their time. Right now, we have an economy that's booming. More than 7 million jobs are unfilled across this country. That's 7 million jobs going wanting right now. The pro-growth policies we put in place are working. Our focus should be on protecting workers and encouraging greater workforce participation, not rewarding lawyers through increased opportunities to garner legal fees. Sadly, this legislation was rushed through the Education and Labor Committee for partisan purposes. It did not receive a thoughtful consideration of bipartisan ideas. We can do better, but once again, we're using precious time to debate political messaging bills instead of solving problems. Mr. Speaker, protecting our older workers and encouraging appropriate job training are outcomes we can all agree on. But the crux of this bill is designed to help attorneys, not workers. I urge my colleagues to look beyond the title and vote no on this payout to trial lawyers. We can do better, and we can protect all workers, including those of age, from age discrimination. And I yield back.
Gentleman from Michigan yields back. Gentleman from North Carolina reserves. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Rhode Island, the co-chair of the Bipartisan Disabilities Caucus, gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Langevin.
Gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank him for his exceptional leadership bringing this bill to the floor. I rise in strong support of the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act. Age is just a number. We hear that all the time, and there's so much truth to it. Yet, each year, too many Americans over the age of 40 face discrimination at the office. In fact, AARP reports that over half of older workers have seen or experienced age discrimination. Congress outlawed workplace discrimination against older Americans over 50 years ago in the Age Discrimination Employment Act. However, due to a misguided 2009 Supreme Court ruling, older Americans still face negative employment actions. As the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission acknowledged in 2018, and I quote, age discrimination remains a significant and costly problem for workers, their families, and our economy, close quote. This is simply unacceptable and it's wrong. Employees over the age of 40 bring talent, experience, and wisdom to an office. Additionally, these workers are more likely to stay in at their companies. On average, Americans between the ages of 55 and 64 stick with their employers 3 times as long as employees aged 25 to 34. Even more disheartening is the age effect discrimination has on disabled workers. And at this time, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the Consortium of Citizens with Disabilities in support of the bill.
Gentleman's request will be covered by general relief.
As it outlines, people with disabilities already face significant barriers to competitive, integrated employment, and we cannot allow another barrier to remain in their way. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to vote in favor of strengthening the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. I thank my good friend, Chairman Scott, for championing this effort. I urge my colleagues to join me in restoring justice for American workers and voting in favor of final passage. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Rhode Island yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Virginia reserves. Gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I will reserve at the moment.
Gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Fox, reserves. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I yield 2 minutes to a distinguished member of the Committee on Education and Labor, the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Wild.
Gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chairman Scott, for yielding. I rise in support of this bill, the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act. Older workers who bring suit for age discrimination are often ostracized at their workplace. They open their lives to invasive probes by defense counsel through written discovery and by deposition and ultimately testifying at a trial. These probes are often meant to embarrass rather than seek the truth. And when our older workers finally reach the courthouse door, it is often almost closed before they even get to the courtroom. As a former civil litigator, I have brought and I have defended multiple age discrimination cases. These are very emotional and difficult claims. No one likes getting older. But when one has to put one's age in full view of all because of perceived discrimination at work, an older worker then has to experience the scrutiny of lawyers and judges and juries to prove that he or she was discriminated against because of age. But worse, our older workers are again discriminated against when they seek redress from the courts. That is because the Supreme Court, in the 2009 case of Gross versus FBL Financial Services, ruled that an older worker bringing an ADEA claim must prove that age was the but-for cause, the sole determining cause of an adverse employment decision. That Supreme Court decision sent a message of impunity to employers looking to discriminate on the basis of age, and it set a precedent for denying justice to older workers across our country. That is not the standard used in other discrimination claims. We must condemn employment discrimination in every form it takes. Yet our employment laws treat age discrimination claims under the Age Discrimination in Employment Act differently, more harshly than other employment discrimination claims. We have an opportunity to restore fairness in our legal system. H.R. 1230, the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act, will ensure equal access to justice. May I have?
Mr. Chair, I yield an additional minute.
Thank you.
Gentleman's recognized for an additional minute.
We have an opportunity to restore fairness in our legal system. H.R. 1230, the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act, will ensure equal access to justice for those who have suffered age discrimination. It will create uniformity in our laws that a worker need only prove that age discrimination was one of any number of motivating factors for an employer's action. Older workers like Mr. Gross, the victim of workplace discrimination and a misguided Supreme Court decision, deserve this bill. I urge a yes vote on this bill, and I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. Gentleman from Virginia reserves. Gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle contend that the 2009 Supreme Court decision in Gross versus FBL Financial Services has weakened age discrimination protections. They also contend this decision had deterred workers from seeking relief from age bias. Let's look at the data. In the 9 years preceding the 2009 Supreme Court decision in Gross, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, the primary agency that enforces federal laws that make it illegal to discriminate, received an average of 19,320 charges of discrimination per year relating to age discrimination. 19,320, Mr. Chair. An EEOC charge is a signed statement asserting employment discrimination. In the 9 years following Gross, the EEOC received an average 20,973 charges per year relating to age discrimination, a slight uptick from the previous 9 years. There is clearly no evidence workers have been discouraged from filing age discrimination charges with the EEOC since the 2009 Supreme Court decision. We also find that age discrimination charges as a percentage of all charges filed with the EEOC are approximately the same for the 9 years before and after the Gross decision, 23.2% before, 22.8% afterwards, respectfully. Again, this does not indicate workers are discouraged from filing age discrimination charges. Congress should make fact-based decisions, and in this case, the facts do not support what H.R. 1230's proponents have asserted. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from North Carolina reserves. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'd yield 3 minutes to the co-chair of the Democratic Caucus Task Force on Aging and Families, the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Chakowski.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank Chairman Scott for yielding to me and rise in strong support of H.R. 1230, the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act. This month, House Democrats are taking historic action to fight for our older Americans across the country. As co-founder and co-chair of the Democratic Caucus Task Force on Aging and Families, I'm proud to announce that our Older Americans Bill of Rights, which we will introduce in the coming weeks, already has over 100 co-sponsors. That resolution is a covenant, reflects a covenant with senior citizens and urges the Congress to uphold the dignity of older Americans and their families. Through that resolution, House Democrats are affirming that seniors have the right to live with dignity and with independence, including the right to high-quality health care, the right to aging in place, and the right to financial security, including protecting against age discrimination in the workplace. And the bill that we're voting on today signals that we are taking those rights so seriously that we are not just making statements about it, but we're taking bold action. The bill before us ensures that senior citizens who have been victims of age discrimination can have their claims adjudicated fairly without having to jump through all kinds of arbitrary hoops created by a misguided court decision. Protecting older workers is about more than just adjudicating claims of discrimination. It is about ensuring older workers have the dignity that they deserve. So I urge all my colleagues to support this measure, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields back the balance of time. Gentleman from Virginia reserves. Gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Chair, older workers are doing quite well in today's modern economy. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, employment for workers aged 65 and older tripled from 1988 to 2018, while employment for younger workers grew by a third. The number of employed people aged 75 and older nearly quadrupled from 461,000 in 1988 to 1.8 million in 2018. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle paint a bleak picture of these valued workers standing in the workforce, when in fact employment trends for older workers are positive in recent decades. According to BLS, in 1998, the median weekly earnings of older full-time employees was 77% of the median for workers aged 16 and up. In 2018, older workers earned 7% more than the median for all workers. The labor force participation rate for older workers has been rising steadily since the late 1990s. Participation rate for younger work age groups either declined or flattened over this period. Over the past 20 years, the number of older workers on full-time work schedules grew 2.5 times faster than the number working part-time. As I said, the picture is bright. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from North Carolina reserves. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Frankel.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to Mr. Scott and my colleagues for their work on this bill. Well, Ben Franklin signed the Declaration of Independence at age 70. Grandma Moses started painting at age 76. We should never, ever put an age limit on our dreams or the ability to make a living. But here's the thing, Mr. Speaker. You can be a dedicated employee and having spent decades building a career that you're proud of, taking care of your family, putting your kids through college, saving for your future, and needing and wanting to work, and then one day when you're ready, retire with dignity, and then out of nowhere, your life is shattered. Your bosses say you're fired. They list their reasons, however, you know the truth. You've been let go to make way for a younger employee, and now you're without a salary, without your health insurance, and you know your odds of getting a new job are slim when you're competing with 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds who are willing to work for lower wages and fewer benefits. And for too many seniors, Mr. Speaker, this is a reality. Nearly 3 in 5 workers have experienced age-based discrimination, not only unfairly depriving the worker of a paycheck, but taking valuable workers out of the workforce. And now a Supreme Court decision has made it even harder to prove age discrimination. The Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act would give senior workers the protection they deserve and society the workers that we need. The poet Robert Browning said, "Grow old with me, the best is yet to be." I urge my colleagues to support this very, very good bill, and I yield back.
Gentlewoman from Florida yields back. Gentleman from Virginia reserves. Gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlewoman, Ms. Fox is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I really find it puzzling that our colleagues paint such a dismal picture of employers. We hear this over and over and over again from the other side of the aisle. As my colleague from Michigan said a little while ago, we have 7 million unfilled jobs in this country right now. Every employer I know, before I came to Congress and since I've been in Congress, cherishes his or her employees. And they don't dismiss employees out of hand just because of their age. They just don't do that. They value their employees. But the other side of the aisle has a real distorted picture of what happens in the private sector. And I want to say that H.R. 1230 doesn't achieve the goals espoused by the bill's sponsors. And let me provide much needed truth in advertising about this bill. Under the bill as written, most plaintiffs, even if they are successful, will not be entitled to receive any monetary damages, payments, or reinstatement. Here's why. Generally, a victim of discrimination is entitled to be made whole, to be put in the position the individual would have been in without the discrimination. This can include monetary damages, back pay, reinstatement, attorney's fees, and court costs. The Supreme Court in the 2009 Gross case eliminated the defense that allows an employer to demonstrate it would have taken the same employment action regardless of age. H.R. 1230 restores this employer defense. An overwhelming majority of employers will be able to make this demonstration to the court. And when they make that demonstration under H.R. 1230, the plaintiff will not be entitled to receive any monetary damages, payments, or reinstatement, although the plaintiff's attorneys will be entitled to fees. So the only party who wins in these cases are the trial lawyers. In addition, H.R. 1230 is specifically written to allow plaintiffs to survive a summary judgment motion that would end their case. But a plaintiff is in for a surprise later when, after going to court, he or she receives no monetary damages and the only one getting paid is his or her attorney. To add insult to injury, the employee may have to pay income taxes on the fees that are awarded to his or her attorney. The bill sponsors never explain how adding the provision that include mixed motive claims and restoring the employer defense, allowing employers to demonstrate they would have taken the same action regardless of the impermissible factor such as age, will benefit employees. In fact, these provisions will only help trial lawyers. H.R. 1230's title and provisions are yet another case of false advertising and empty promises for older workers. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from North Carolina reserves. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield 2 minutes to a distinguished member of the Committee on Education and Labor, the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Stefanik.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my district, older Americans are staying in the workforce longer than previous generations, making significant contributions to our growing economy. Yet these later years of a worker's career are becoming increasingly unstable. Over half of the workers over the age of 50 are pushed out of long-time jobs before they are ready to retire. The consequences of age discrimination are particularly harmful because once older workers are removed from the workforce, they are more likely to remain unemployed. The economic strain that this can cause for them and their families is significant, but losing a career is bigger than just financial security. Separating adults from the dignity of work has a broader impact on the well-being of communities like my district, where I serve one of the largest constituencies of older Americans in the entire country. This bill strengthens the ADEA by reaffirming the pre-2009 standard, simply that age discrimination cannot be a motivating factor in employment decisions. I'm proud to support H.R. 1230 on behalf of the many constituents of the 21st District who have advocated for this bill for over a decade. I yield the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields back. Gentleman from Virginia reserves. Gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Fox, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Scott.
Mr. Chair, I'm prepared to close, so I'll reserve.
Gentleman from Virginia reserves. Gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Fox, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're very happy to cooperate. And in closing, I yield myself such time as I may consume, Mr. Chair. It's encouraging to see more and more older Americans continue to make invaluable contributions in the workplace. And committee Republicans are committed to eliminating discrimination in the workplace to ensure productive and competitive workforce. Unfortunately, H.R. 1230 is an unnecessary and misleading bill that does not protect older workers and is yet another case of false advertising and empty promises. Committee Democrats failed to allow a proper examination of H.R. 1230, depriving members of the opportunity to review the legislation appropriately before it was considered by the committee, and as a result, we're left with the ill-advised bill before us today. This one-size-fits-all, government-knows-best approach is not the answer and will significantly benefit trial lawyers at the cost of older American workers. I strongly encourage a no vote on H.R. 1230, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Fox, yields back. Gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Scott, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield myself the balance of the time.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chair, it's been more than a decade since the Supreme Court heightened the burden of proof for workers seeking to legally challenge age discrimination in the workplace. However, our responsibility to ensure that no older Americans are forced out of a job or denied work opportunity because of age has not changed. And at a time when Americans are working longer into their lives and need policy solutions that empower older workers to challenge workplace discrimination, we know that a 2018 survey by the AARP showed that 3 out of 5 workers aged 45 or older had seen or experienced age discrimination in the workplace. Some of my colleagues contend that this bill was rushed to the floor. However, we must remember that this is a bipartisan proposal that has undergone substantial debate since it was first introduced in 2009. Over the past 10 years, Congress has deliberated on this legislation through 4 hearings, including 2 hearings in the Committee on Education and Labor. Both the House and Senate have introduced and gradually improved the legislation in the 111th, 112th, 113th, 114th, and 115th, and the current 116th Congress. It is long overdue. The Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act is a bipartisan, bicameral solution that restores protections for older workers and ensures that we treat all workers facing discrimination, whether it's on the basis of sex, race, religion, national origin, or age, with consistency and fairness. I want to thank Congressman Sensenbrenner for working with us to bring this important legislation to the floor, and I want to remind everyone exactly what this bill does. Under the bill, and before 2009, if a person could prove discrimination, that was the beginning of the case. The defendant would be able to show that they would have been fired or not hired anyway, but that's on the defendant to show. If they don't show that, then the proven discrimination entitles the plaintiff to damages. If the defendant can show that it would have done it anyway, discrimination is already proved, and as the gentlelady from North Carolina pointed out, attorney's fees would be available. Under the new law after 2009, not only do you have to prove that you were discriminated against, told we don't hire old people, you also have to prove that you would have gotten a job anyway. Well, you don't have that information. You can't show that you would have gotten a job. You don't know the qualifications of the person that was hired. And so, Mr. Chair, we know that this legislation is extremely important. Older workers want this legislation, as evidenced by a letter of support from the Leadership Council on Aging Organizations, over 24 organizations representing senior citizens, and another letter joined by 26 advocacy organizations supporting the bill, and finally a letter of support for AARP that I'll be asking unanimous consent to introduce during general leave. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of the time. Mr. Scott, all time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. In lieu of the amendment, the nature of the substitute recommended by the Committee on Education and Labor printed in the bill, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of the Rules Committee print 116-46 shall be considered as adopted. The bill as amended shall be considered as the original bill for the purpose of further amendments under the 5-minute rule and shall be considered as read. No further amendments to the bill as amended shall be in order except those printed in House Report 116-377 Each such further amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report by a member designated in the report, shall be considered read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and the opponent, and shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 1, printed in House Report 116377. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 1, printed in House Report Number 116-377, offered by Mr. DeSaulnier of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 790, the gentleman from California, Mr. DeSaulnier, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The American workforce is getting older and working longer than ever before. In fact, by 2004, the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimated that 25% of the U.S. workforce will be composed of workers over the age of 55, and a third of those workers will be older than 65. At the same time, complaints of age discrimination are on the rise. According to enforcement statistics, the EEOC received over 20,000 complaints of age discrimination in 2017, accounting for 23% of all discrimination charges filed that year. That's a jump of 4,000 charges of age discrimination since the year 2000, and is likely a severe underestimate, as cases of age discrimination often go unreported. More so, a 2018 study published by the AARP found that more than 60% of workers aged 45 and older have seen or experienced age discrimination, and 76% say that they consider age discrimination to be a major obstacle to finding a new job. The Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act would help address this problem by making the burden of proof for age discrimination claims more equitable and more in line with other forms of discrimination. This has important implication for older workers. Fewer cases could be thrown out or settled before trial, meaning long overdue justice for older Americans. It would also have important implications for the EEOC, ushering in a significant increase in the number of age discrimination claims and therefore EEOC's workload. My amendment goes one step further and ensures that Congress has a full picture of the scope of age discrimination in the American workforce and a better understanding of existing gaps in the EEOC's ability to address and prevent workplace age discrimination. This would allow Congress to better support the EEOC in its work, meaningfully address age discrimination in the American workforce, and empower millions of older Americans. I'd like to thank my colleague, Congressman Davis, for his bipartisan partnership, and I urge support for this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of time. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
To speak in opposition to the amendment, Mr. Chair.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As my colleague from California and my colleague from Illinois know, I respect both of them greatly. And I would have thought that they would have come up with an amendment that would have helped us understand this issue before we pass such a bill instead of after we pass it. As I understand it, this amendment requires the GAO to report on the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's ability to investigate and process age discrimination cases after H.R. 1230 unnecessarily reduces the burden of proof in these cases and nullifies decades of Supreme Court precedent. This amendment's not needed. The EEOC already reports on its workload management and ability to respond to age discrimination charges in the agency's annual budget request and recurring strategic plans. We should not mandate that GAO waste resources on an unnecessary, redundant report. In addition, assuming this GAO report discovers new information, such information would be useful before the House votes to expand liability in 4 employment statutes. The new law will be in place and the horse will have already left the barn by the time we receive the information. We all agree American workers should be protected from discrimination in the workplace in every form possible. It's already against the law to discriminate based on a worker's age, as it should be. Congress has enacted separate non-discrimination statutes, including the Age Discrimination and Employment Act, because age discrimination includes issues that are different from other forms of discrimination addressed in other statutes. Under H.R. 1230, a plaintiff can argue that age was only a motivating, not a decisive factor that led to an employer's unfavorable employment action. Allowing such mixed motive claims will lead to more frivolous litigation and upset the careful balance Congress enacted in the ADEA. Unfortunately, H.R. 1230 will not help workers. Under the bill, a plaintiff is very unlikely to receive any monetary damages from the defendant because most employers will be able to show to the court that they would have taken the same employment action regardless of the worker's age. The only parties who will win in nearly all cases in H.R. 1230 are trial lawyers. Disappointingly, Democrats have chosen to further their pro-trial lawyer agenda by bringing H.R. 1230 up for consideration, a bill falsely advertised as a protection for workers. H.R. 1230 is yet another one-size-fits-all mandate that fails to address the purported problem, ignores real-world experiences, and disregards decades of Supreme Court decisions. This amendment does nothing to address the fundamental flaws in H.R. 1230, is redundant with other government reports, and will not provide the House timely information. I urge my colleagues to oppose it. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from North Carolina reserves the balance of time. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 2 minutes for my friend, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my good friend, Mr. DeSaulnier from California, and also thank you to my good friend, Ms. Fox, the ranking member of the Ed and Labor Committee, and also Chairman Scott for your work on this. I rise in support of Mr. DeSaulnier's amendment, of which I am a co-sponsor. This amendment will require the GAO to report on the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's ability to meet the demands of its workload in terms of the number of cases they receive. If this important bill is enacted, the EEOC will inevitably be required to review an increasing number of mixed motive age discrimination claims, which are worthy of review. This amendment is important because to adequately address workplace discrimination that relates to age or any other factor, we must have the resources to address and correct the problem. I encourage my colleagues to vote yes on this amendment, and thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of time. Gentleman from California reserves. Gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I simply will say again that I think we should vote no on this amendment. I think it's redundant and unnecessary, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman, Ms. Fox yields back the balance of her time. A gentleman from California is recognized.
I appreciate the comments by the ranking member, and I hope that we will continue our respect and friendship, even though we're in disagreement on this, and I urge support for this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California yields back the balance of time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It's now in order to consider Amendment Number 2, printed in House Report 116-377. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 2, printed in House Report Number 116-377, offered by Mr. Rodney Davis of Illinois.
Pursuant to the House Resolution 790, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Rodney Davis, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of my bipartisan amendment to H.R. 1230, the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act. I'd like to thank my friends on both sides of the aisle for their co-sponsorship of my amendment, including Representative Shelley Pingree, Elise Stefanik, Haley Stevens, Jennifer Gonzalez-Colon, Marcy Kaptur, Abigail Spanberger, Betty McCullum, Mark DeSaulnier, David Trone, Chris Smith, Pete Stauber, Will Hurd, and my colleague from the great state of Illinois, Mike Bost. I'd also like to thank Chairman Scott for his support for this amendment. I was proud to co-sponsor this bill, which provides an important fix caused by the 2009 Gross versus the FBL Financial Services, Inc. Supreme Court decision. This bill will ensure that older workers can seek the justice they deserve when they face age discrimination in the workplace on a level playing field. My amendment highlights the discrimination that women face in the workplace based not only on gender, but on age as well. According to a 2018 report from the EEOC, women, especially older women, but also those at middle age, were subjected to more age discrimination than most older men. In fact, some research suggests that ageism at work begins at age 40 for women, 5 years earlier than men. This is unacceptable, and we must find ways to correct the problem. This amendment would require the Department of Labor and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to conduct a comprehensive study on these age discrimination cases. DOL and the EEOC would then be required to make recommendations for best practices to combat age discrimination of women in the workplace. The challenges that women face are not partisan issues, and together we can and should, Mr. Speaker, make every effort to address them. Employers should make and have the right tools to make conscious efforts to ensure that women have equal rights and opportunities in the workplace, regardless of their age. I encourage my colleagues to support my amendment and to protect older adults from age discrimination. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Illinois reserves the balance of time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to claim time in opposition, although I do not oppose the amendment.
Without objection, gentleman is recognized.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Maine who worked hard with the sponsor of the amendment. Gentlelady from Maine, Ms. Pingree.
Gentleman from Maine is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to Mr. Scott for Chairman Scott for his leadership on the bill. We're considering this afternoon the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act. Maine is the oldest state in the union by median age, and older Mainers are an important part of our workforce. As we experience a tight labor market with low unemployment, it's natural to think that this workforce would have more opportunities available to them. And yet we often hear about constituents who struggle to find and keep work that supports themselves and their families. When age discrimination is a factor, these workers deserve fair treatment under the law. I am proud to be a co-sponsor of the underlying bill and urge my colleagues to vote yes. I'm also proud to offer this important amendment with my colleague, Congressman Davis, that addresses the connection between age and gender discrimination. Countless studies have shown that women are hired less and paid less in many fields. Compounded by the real effects of age discrimination, that means older women are disproportionately impacted by bias in the workplace. The National Bureau of Economic Research backs this up. In a 2015 field experiment, resumes from older women got substantially fewer callbacks from employers than those from older men, and younger women. Our amendment would direct the Department of Labor and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to collect data on the disproportionate impact of age discrimination on older women and make recommendations for how to address that impact. Women are deeply materially harmed by inequities in our economy. On average, they take home lower salaries, are able to save less for retirement, and receive less in Social Security benefits. In tandem with age discrimination, all this means that we are leaving older women vulnerable. Addressing this intersection is about economic security, making sure that older women have the chance in fair environments for equitable pay. I ask my colleagues to support this amendment. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Maine yields back. Gentleman from Virginia reserves. Gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I inquire how much time we have remaining?
Gentleman has 3 minutes left.
I'd like to yield as much time as she may consume to my good friend from Puerto Rico, Ms. Gonzalez-Colon.
The gentlewoman from Puerto Rico is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker, and Congressman Davis for allowing me to speak today on behalf of this bipartisan amendment. Thank you for allowing me to be a co-sponsor of this amendment. Age Discrimination and Employment Act of 1967 was signed into law more than 52 years ago. And according to the American Association of Retired Persons, AARP, 3 in 5 older workers have been seen or experienced age discrimination. Between 1997 and 2018, 423,000 workers filed an age discrimination complaint, averaging 20,000 claims per year. This figure is 22% of all workplace discrimination claims. Furthermore, AARP reports that 76% see age discrimination as a barrier to finding a new job. The Puerto Rico Department of Labor and Human Resources states that there are more than 300,000 women aged 35 or older in the labor force on the island. This population represents 28.8% of all workers in an economy that has experienced a structural downturn for more than a decade. This amendment simply requires the Labor Secretary and the Chair of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to submit a report determining the number of women who may have been discriminated against them because of their age. As Vice Chair of the Congressional Women's Caucus, I am proud to support this measure to assist aging women in the workforce. Thank you. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Puerto Rico yields back. Gentleman from Illinois reserves. Gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Scott, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee is recognized.
I thank the gentleman from Virginia, and I thank the sponsors of this amendment, the very important amendment, Mr. Davis and Ms. Pingree. And I rise to support the underlying bill, the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act, that I'm very proud to have been a co-sponsor of. What kind of thanks are we giving to hardworking Americans who, because of the growth of this population, senior citizens, older Americans, they are ready to work in the workforce and provide their experience, their thoughtfulness, and their leadership. Unfortunately, a Supreme Court decision in the 2000s turned this upside down by requiring those older Americans to be burdened by the responsibility of saying it is only the fact that we are old, or that there are not multiple reasons why I could have been fired. How dangerous that is when an older American feels vulnerable. And the underlying amendment is also very important, dealing with women who may have had to get out of the workforce to raise their children or to not get promotions so they can tend to their children or other matters or be a caretaker for other family members. This is an important initiative to equalize the playing field, to value those older Americans with experience who are ready to work, who have been giving their best, and who are ready to be the kind of experienced mentors in the workplace that really make America great. So I rise to support this legislation. It is vital to both impact and correct a very bad decision by the United States Supreme Court, and I believe that this will give the kind of affirmation to the value of all Americans, and particularly our older Americans. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas yields back. Gentleman from Virginia reserves. Gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I urge a yes vote on this bipartisan amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Illinois yields back. Balance of time. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield myself the balance of the time just to thank the gentleman for his amendment and hope it passes. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 3, printed in House Report 116-377. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Yes, I would like to yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Does the gentleman have an amendment?
Yes, I have an amendment today.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in House Report number 116-377, offered by Mr. Allen of Georgia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 790, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
When considering any legislation, the House should first determine whether legislation is needed, and next, whether the bill under consideration will adequately address or improve the situation. The Committee on Education and Labor, unfortunately, did not have a full hearing on H.R. 1230 and only heard from one witness invited by the Democrats about the bill at a general hearing on multiple topics. This legislation, at the very least, deserved a standalone hearing so that committee members in the House could get more information to make a considered decision regarding this legislation. Publicly available data does not show that the Supreme Court decisions in Gross versus FBL Financial Services or Nassar versus University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center have discouraged individuals from filing discrimination charges with the EEOC, which is the primary agency that enforces federal laws that make it illegal to discriminate. A discrimination charge is a signed statement asserting employment discrimination. The lone Democrat invited witness who testified in favor of H.R. 1230 at the Committee on Education and Labor's hearing in May, which covered several topics and bills, acknowledged that it is difficult to quantify the impact that the Gross decision has had on the number of older workers who bring cases and the number of those who win them. This witness also acknowledged that when we might have expected a drop in charges due to Gross-inspired discouragement from employment attorneys, there was a sizable jump in the number of ADEA charges filed with the EEOC. EEOC data shows that the rate of EEOC age discrimination charges as a percentage of all charges filed is approximately the same for the 9 years before and after the Gross decision. There's been a slight uptick in the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act retaliation charges as a percentage of all charges filed in the 4 years following the Nassar decision, which does not indicate individuals have been discouraged from filing these charges. Court decisions show that the plaintiffs have continued to win age discrimination and Title VII retaliation cases in the wake of the Supreme Court's decision in Gross and Nassar. This amendment will provide Congress much-needed data on the impact of the two Supreme Court cases at issue in H.R. 1230. If the GAO report indicates Gross and Nassar have not discouraged individuals from seeking relief or from achieving it, the bill would not go into effect. The House should look before it leaps, and members should vote in favor of this amendment to ensure this happens. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Georgia reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to seek time in opposition to this amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to speak in opposition to Mr. Allen's amendment to delay the effects of this bill. We do not need a study to tell us that a substantially higher burden of proof for some forms of discrimination makes it far more difficult for workers to get their day in court and to prevail. People may be winning cases, but they're not going to court in the first place in huge numbers. When cases become materially more difficult to win, attorneys become much less willing and able to represent workers in those cases. We've already had a 10-year delay in restoring justice. No more delays are necessary or warranted. Age discrimination in the workplace is disturbingly pervasive. According to an AARP study released last year, 3 in 5 older workers report that they have seen or experienced age discrimination on the job. That's 60%. Nearly 2/3 of women and more than 3/4 of African American workers aged 45 and older say they've seen or experienced age discrimination in the workplace. 3/4 of workers aged 45 and older blame age discrimination for their own lack of confidence in finding a new job. 3/4. Mr. Chairman, I ran the workforce system of the state of Michigan for 4 years, and over again, I met workers who had lost their jobs because of age discrimination. And most of them weren't even contemplating taking legal action. They were just seeking help to find a new job. I remember a gentleman from Bay City in Michigan who had been in college years earlier when his dad died of a heart attack suddenly. And his mom said to him, "Sorry, son, you know everybody has to help keep the family afloat." So he dropped out of college and he went to work in retail. I met him 30 years later. He had been a manager at a sporting goods store, and the corporation looked at him and said, "We can get somebody way younger than that to run this store for half the money," and they fired him. Thankfully, we had the No Worker Left Behind program in the state of Michigan, and he was able to go back and finish his bachelor's degree. But he wasn't even contemplating taking legal action under this statute. I ran into those cases over and over, Mr. Chairman. The enactment of the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, or ADEA, in 1967 was an important part of Congress's work to define and protect civil rights in the 1960s. But over the years, the courts have failed to interpret the ADEA as a civil rights statute, and instead have narrowly interpreted these protections and broadly construed the statute's exceptions, compounding the barriers facing older workers. The Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act is a bipartisan proposal that realigns the legal standard for proving age discrimination to simplify the requirement so employees have a genuine mechanism to fight back under the law, just like with the standards for proving discrimination based on sex, race, or national origin. It's that simple. This amendment is designed to keep this bill from going into effect indefinitely. There's no deadline for GAO to conduct the study this amendment requires and report back to Congress. It's a delay tactic when we already have mountains of evidence telling us that older workers are facing discrimination at work. They need protection now. And finally, this Congress has been holding hearings on this issue for years. We've had 4 hearings over the last 9 years. It's time to act. I urge my colleagues to join me in proposing this amendment, and I reserve.
Gentleman from Michigan reserves the balance of time. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and again, I repeat, the lone witness, the Democratic witness of our at the Committee of Education and Labor's hearing in May on H.R. 1230 acknowledged that it is difficult to quantify the impact that the Gross decision had on the number of older workers who bring cases and the numbers of those who win them. This witness also acknowledged that we might have expected a drop of charges due to the Gross-inspired discouragement from employment attorneys, that there was a sizable jump in the number of ADEA charges filed with the EEOC. I merely present this amendment to make sure that the committee and this House looks at the data before we have some law here that's going to create really less opportunities for people to file these charges. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I urge a yes vote on my amendment.
Does the gentleman yield?
Yeah, I yield, yes.
Okay. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen, yields back the time. Gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to remind everybody that this is a bipartisan proposal, and it's undergone substantial debate since it was first introduced over a decade ago. Over the past 10 years, Congress has deliberated on this bill through 4 legislative hearings, including 2 hearings in the Education and Labor Committee. Both the House and the Senate have introduced and gradually improved this legislation in the 111th, 112th, 113th, 114th, 115th, and now the 116th Congress. It's long overdue that we take action. I urge all colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Michigan yields back the balance of the time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia will be postponed. It's now in order to consider amendment number 4, printed on House Report 116-377. For what purpose does the honourable gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.